Podcasserole. Welcome in.
You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent's and Leadership Podcast. We're a proud member of the Podcasserole Network. Hello, Jamie.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Jamie, I texted Max Silverman last night during the game one of the
NBA Finals.
NBA Finals.
His
Knickerbockers.
New York Knicks
The Knickerbockers.
versus the San Antonio Spurs. I told him they needed to win game one, and they did.
They did. It didn't look good for a little while there. I said, wow, what a great game so far. It was at the end of the third quarter. He's, oh my God, so stressful.
There's, particularly as it relates to, I don't know, volley, football, and basketball are my two favorite sports to watch, and getting to have someone who understands the stress of being a basketball fan and seeing him die, it's so enjoyable to not have a stake and just be like, that was a really good game.
How about for me? I didn't follow the season at all, but as a New Yorker, I'm like, I'm all in. I'm watching with great interest.
Oh, goodness gracious. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I had to watch that as I flew home from Little Rock. God, what a fight. What a fight to get home from Little Rock, Arkansas last night.
Is that right?
I got into bed at 2:15 a.m. It took that long to get from Little Rock to. It was brutal. It was one of those travel days of just awfulness. But I did get to see some of the game in Little Rock, and then I landed in Denver and was delayed there. And so I got to watch the fourth quarter in Denver. Yeah, all good. I'm good now.
Good.
I'm good now. How are you? How are things with you?
They're going okay. I've got a kid graduating high school this week, so that's exciting.
That's fun.
And so I have family coming in, and that's exciting. And we'll have a paella dinner, which is exciting. And what else can I tell you? He's going to prom, which is confusing since he doesn't have any fancy clothes or nice clothes to wear, but I guess he'll figure it out.
Wait, how is prom right before he graduates? That's such an interesting timing of prom.
Jamie, I'm thinking that this episode will actually air on Tuesday, so I'm saying it this week, but it's next week. Yeah, you blew it.
I blew it. Well, I am an imperfect host.
There you go. So I've had some really great conversations with the new school that I'm going to at Cahoa and Cartagena. I mean, these teacher leaders, their conversations around standards, their power standards, really just thoughtful and meaningful. I'd like to add this, but that means I want to take away this one. And does anyone know the history around why we were comparing and contrasting these types of genres of at this particular grade level? I'm like, oh my God, I would have loved to have been a part of some of those conversations in some of the schools where I had worked previously. And there was so much turnover, and it wasn't that people weren't interested. It just, we didn't get there yet. We just hadn't gotten there.
Can I ask a question about, that's amazing. First, I'm going to say, that's amazing. I think so. It's going to be so fun to hear, not just even every checkpoint along the way. You and I talking in the first month, first 6 months, first year.
I know. People are going to be like, oh my God. Although season 5 will start after the summer, and season 5 is going to be the inclusion of many more international heads. And so there's going to be a lot of, I don't know, almost a shift in the way that I think about how I talk during the podcast as someone who has a lived experience of a superintendent, so I can speak to what did I do, to now shifting to this new role of what do I think I'm going to do, and then coming back and sharing what did I learn from that. So I think it's going to be kind of fun.
I think it's going to be great. I have a wondering, given what you just shared about the way in which your staff is having this conversation about power standards and making sure that they're clear about what they need to teach. What's something you took away from this conversation with Zaretta Hammond that we're just about to listen to? Is there something about learning that stood out to you? Because honestly, so I've known Zaretta for a long time. I think she is a genius. I honestly think she's a genius, an instructional genius. And we're going to get into my favorite conversation about instruction today. And so I'm interested to see if something stood out to you. There's something that you want people to listen to.
Totally. So first of all, thank you for taking us from, Peter, that's great that you're doing this in season 5. Let's also remind people, we actually had a guest this week. So I want people to listen for, she talks about this term cognitive justice. Yeah. And what you'll also hear is part of my understanding of Zaretta's work is from reading her work, listening to other interviews she's had. And so I really sort of entered the conversation through an equity lens, and she is pretty clear, and I say clear as kind, clear in trying to help me really broaden my understanding around justice and that cognitive justice, particularly talking about a student's cognition, particularly when they've been underdeveloped, the skills and the techniques that leaders and teachers can use to develop that. I felt so aligned with the conversations I was having this past week with the teachers in Kaho'a, understanding how they're trying to develop the learner to be able to have that productive struggle, to carry the learning, to not have an over-reliance on the instructor, but that there be an intentional passing of the work and the lifting to the kid. And so I would say, I want people to listen for that. Usually when I have conversations, there's almost an immediate, you wrote this book, tell me about this book. You wrote this article, tell me about this article. And I make some assumptions about past work and how it informs current work. And Zaretta is really clear about how past work is important, and let's not lose focus on what we're trying to achieve for kids. And it doesn't have a very smooth rhythm at first. And then I feel like we really get into a really nice space where I'm learning as opposed to just being an interviewer kind of thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does a little bit. I think when people listen, they'll listen. I texted you as I was listening to it. Us in the beginning of the podcast sounded spicy. And so
spicy. Yeah.
It was spicy. And then it became about pancakes. And
not spicy pancakes. And if you're saying what? Listen, it is a really great conversation. I was grateful to her for giving me time. She has such a deep network, and I hope that they'll have take away as much as I did in terms of learning. So
it's brilliant. I'm really excited for people to listen to this one. This is a special one in my book.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents of Leadership podcast. I'm Peter Stiefelman.
And I'm Jay Melman-San, and we'll see you on the other side.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Zaretta Hammond, a national education consultant, the best-selling author of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, and the author of a new book that we're going to talk about by Corwin Press, Rebuilding Students' Learning Power, Teaching for Instructional Equity and Cognitive Justice. She's a former high school and community college writing instructor. She has spent more than 25 years advising school districts and nonprofit organizations on equity, literacy, and culturally responsive teaching. Zaretta, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I am thrilled. I'm going to say, we did it. Zaretta, we did it. We've been trading emails for months about getting together, and you are one really busy person. And one of the things that you had mentioned in one of our emails was about doing some year-long pilots, and that just got me interested just in terms of just sort of like setting the context of all the different kinds of things that you do. Would you mind can we start there? What other pilots? What are they doing? Anything that you've learned?
I think about how we build teacher and leader and coach capacity, and I envision it as a learning journey. So what I offer, rather than the one-off PD sessions, I offer something that is mid-size, which I call the 90-day praxis, in which we have 4 sessions and we follow Ferreri's praxis cycle. And then there's a year-long instructional equity by design PLC, where we're doing more integration of powerful evidence-based instructional practices coupled with inquiry. So right now we've got 2 pilots. I've run it before, but we're in a pilot year where we're retooling some elements before we open it up to other people, but it's really interesting. So I have one school district that's in Illinois, and I have another school district that is in Washington, D.C.
Gotcha. Okay, so if I understand correctly, it's sort of like instead of bringing in a really talented and interesting person to sort of do a one day where people leave going, that was really good and powerful, but I have no idea how I would actually do this work, that it is really an intentional cycles of inquiry bringing. Is it mostly those who have sort of signed on to say, I'm interested in doing this work? Or is it like, how does one, if a district were listening today and saying, man, after listening to her conversation with Peter today, I'd like to be in touch. What does that look like?
They can always be in touch, but that may not be the offering that
it's got to be approved. It's a lot of work.
And more importantly, there has to be a readiness, right? And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about leadership. If the leader hasn't created the conditions for a professional learning culture, some of the basics, then this won't work for them. And I think there is a way in which people just think about strategies. Oh, we'll get somebody to come in once a month for so many months. This is not that. And it's not just inquiry. This is literally, can you move a dependent learner from that kind of learned helplessness to become a cognitively independent learner? So It is building teacher capacity to be the personal trainer of students' cognition. It's going to require them to not only have reflective practice in terms of what they're doing, but to reposition their gaze around the student and not the strategy, right?
I
And
appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole lot more than that. And this is why anybody going to my website would find nothing about it.
Then let's jump into the book, because you were so generous to share with me a copy that I could read as a way to sort of prepare for our conversation. So tell us about your book, Rebuilding Students' Learning Power.
This is what all my work has always been. I think a lot of people will know me around culturally responsive teaching. I wrote the book because I had been a community college and high school writing instructor, teacher. My class wasn't English language arts. It was composition. I taught students how to be good expository writers. And it's where I realized that I could circle their papers with red ink all day, that it wasn't going to change their ability to carry that cognitive load, be metacognitive about what needed to be changed, and then actually be able to do that, make those changes. So I started really dabbling into the cognitive and social neuroscience and started to pull that forward into the work around equity that was emerging around the mid 2010s. And just a lot of people hadn't put those two things together. So that's been the focus of my work for a long time, really helping people understand the science of learning is not new. Culturally responsive teaching is not just about relationships. It's not just about implicit bias. It's about helping students rebuild their learning power. This new book takes chapter 8 of my first book and just blows it up with the nuts and bolts of how he did that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I was, as I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, the well-meaning, the actions that some schools take about bring your flag to school and then we'll bring some food together. And you're like, oh, that may be a place where people start, but you do not stay there. And let me actually now go deeper into the types of actions and behaviors that teachers and students can take that will develop their own thinking in their own brain. So I wonder if in a moment I'm going to ask you a little bit more about that. If you're just joining us, my guest today is Zaretta Hammond, national education consultant and author of Rebuilding Students' Learning Power. And she brings more than 25 years of experience helping educators connect neuroscience, equity, and culture responsive teaching to deepen engagement and rigor. And so, Zaretta, in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. There are 3 dimensions, and one of them is collective aspiration. And inside that dimension is a term, strong moral focus. And as I was reading your book, you referred to a moral imperative. You move beyond the traditional equity talk that I just mentioned in terms of bringing food to a potluck and then declaring that we've done some equity work, but taking those traditional equity talks and you put that into your full title of your book about cognitive justice. And how do you define that term? Why is it the moral imperative for educators today?
The World Bank actually has a goal to reduce learning poverty, which they connect to this larger term, cognitive justice. I didn't make it up. The rest of the world, wherever the footprint of colonization is, that is what they're discussing. The U.S. is a little late to the game. And so to the point that the cognitive justice is, we can increase belonging, we can have social, psychological safety in schools, but to what end if students' cognition has been underdeveloped? And that honestly was the primary lever when in the US we had segregated schooling, Jim Crow schooling. That was the primary mechanism, white supremacy culture wanting to maintain itself. And so this sorting through the underdevelopment of cognition is just the context. Once we understand that, then that moral imperative is really to help every student become a powerful learner.
Can you expand on that a little bit more, unpack it a little bit more? I'm thinking to myself, I have a lot of leaders that I talk to throughout the week, some that I coach formally, some more informally, who are trying to figure out how to do some of this work in an environment and an atmosphere and conditions that would prove to be pretty difficult, whether it's by state external pressures or at the federal level as well.
What do you mean by difficult? Say more.
Sure. So they would say that the moment they want to unpack some of this work and really look at it from this cognitive justice or cognitive peace would be seen as a DEI activity, as a, and it's immediately written off by those power structures that say, don't go there, we're not doing that work.
This is not DEI work. What it is, couching this in terms of making sure that for every learner, they have the skills and ability to close their learning gaps. So I talk about it as a pedagogy of possibility versus a pedagogy of compliance. For example, in one of the pilots that I'm running, our focus is student discourse, because what they've come to realize is that the student doesn't have the structures and the routines of talking, and the teachers doing all the talking, and the students limited to a turn and talk, then they're not going to actually engage in the kind of cognitive productive struggle that's going to grow their dendrites, that's going to lead to conceptual understanding, and so on. I don't ever have to talk about this as a cognitive justice initiative. So this is what schools are up to anyway, when the cognitive part is simply every student deserves this kind of powerful learning. That's not happening. A lot of students are still being sorted. A lot of students are still being tracked, even though we call ourselves in most schools in this day and age have detracked. But we know that a lot of students don't have those skills. So I think it's how a leader really talks about the work so that they understand this is work that everyone has said they want to take on, but understanding kind of the antecedent why certain groups may not be there. It's not a motivation issue. It's not a their parents don't care issue. It is understanding, as Joel Mehta at Harvard University says, it's how the grammar of schooling in America works. That's not a topic that anybody has to belabor. So this is why it's not a DEI thing. We are not in certain schools or certain places helping all students develop those kinds of skills that the science of learning tells us makes them a good information processor.
I would recommend and encourage people to A, buy your book, and then B, go to page 204. There's a list of tools that speak specifically to ways that students can genuinely engage with each other in discourse that goes well beyond the think, pair, share. That is everything from world cafes to metaphor use to playing the dozens, which I'm curious about what that might look like in a classroom as they're dealing with a specific tools.
Here's what I would say, Peter, that I think is so important. I wouldn't encourage people just to jump to that page. I would strongly encourage
That's
them
true.
because I actually lay out a process, right? There are 5 steps. The first step is create the conditions. We want to create a cognitive apprenticeship in the classroom. Why? Because the students that are already independent learners will lean into those tools. They'll use those tools. Students who are dependent learners are a little apprehensive. They may have internalized the notion that I'm not smart, I can't get it, I struggle, not understanding the science of learning, which says all learners struggle. That's how the brain learns. But when you can become metacognitive and metastrategic, now you're able to understand that struggle is just an information loop, right? All errors are information. That is the condition that the teacher has to set up, right? Then you're teaching students learn to learn skills, right? I lay out 5 of them. Those tools then are used in service of this apprenticeship. Just somebody going to chef school. The utensils aren't the focus of chef school. You do learn to use them, but if you don't understand, does it need salt? Does it need sugar? More acid? They are principles of learning. And we really have not leveraged how to help students learn. It's not the tools themselves, like the knives and forks, but it is the student actually becoming more metacognitive about their learning moves and learning how to manipulate them, and the teacher being that personal trainer of student cognition, right? And so, again, creating those conditions, this is why I think the book, a lot of people are reading it as teams, they're reading it at their PLC, leaders are reading it together. I was just with another group of aspiring leaders, and they're reading it as part of their instructional leadership team to really understand the instructional shifts they want to see happen. How do they create the conditions? how do they make sure that the teacher is supporting the student as the primary actor? So that's what's a little unique about it. And I think any leader that is their moral imperative.
If I could back up, there's another term that you mentioned in the book. It's way back in chapter 1, and it also appears in chapter 9, this concept of cognitive redlining in schools. And I really was curious if you would talk a little bit about that. What is cognitive redlining, and how can your framework or some of those tools help dismantle it?
My point simply is that the red line is the result of this cognitive underdevelopment. Again, it's in the DNA of our public schooling. It's not, to me, this is why it really is something that I just lift up in chapter 1 as this is our context. You got to know your context. But the rest of the book really does not belabor the fact that there is a cognitive red line. We know the antidote to that is to develop students' learning power, right? And so again, I don't have to keep focusing on the red line if I'm empowering students so that no matter what line they encounter, they have the cognitive resources, they are good information processors, that they are able to accelerate their own learning, no matter what the learning conditions, right? It's almost resistant to whatever barriers may be a part of a school district, unbeknownst to them, or something they're working on. So again, cognitive justice and cognitive redlining go together, but they are just the context. And I wouldn't want any listener to think that is all the book is about. The book is actually about the science of learning and how we bring that into the classroom as an application. How do we go from brain-based strategies to building teacher capacity to actually build students' conceptual understanding, giving them new tools and processes to actually engage in productive struggle, like all the things we're talking about that have become cliche or almost jargon.
I really appreciate you reminding us it is about understanding where we've been to know where we are to then know where we're going. And so you're really helping us sort of have that collective aspiration of where we need to be going as a school system. So thank you.
And not to get caught up in the where we've been. Like this, we don't need to belabor injustice and oppression. That we don't need to belabor that. You just need to understand what has it left in terms of the kinds of structures that leaders need to dismantle.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. I'd like to ask you a question. And in light of something you recently said about all errors are information, this is a question I ask all guests who come on the podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
Oh, the imperfect leader is spot on. And when I start working with leaders, we start as partners and we have some time where we're just making sure we're aligned and in sync, and then slowly roll out the longer highlights or projects that we're working on with staff and teachers and coaches. But one of the things that becomes important is that the leaders are learning together. And a phrase that I use often is the first pancake, right? So an imperfect leader understands intelligent failure. Amy Edmonds talks about this, The Right Kind of Wrong. Great book. She really lifts up the idea of intelligent failure and says there are some hallmarks of that, right? And this is that idea that errors, it's not the outcome we wanted, but if we take a moment and learn from it, just like when we make pancakes, that first pancake is always a little jacked up. But nobody
jacked up.
Oh my gosh. Pink and gooey, beige and gooey on one side, burnt and crispy on the other. But no one shuts the kitchen down. Instead, what they do is they use that information to adjust maybe the thickness of the batter, or maybe the griddle's too hot, or maybe there's not enough oil or butter on there. There's information to glean from this imperfect outcome with that first pancake. And to know that this is not only an inquiry stance, but actually how we move forward. I think sometimes leaders are afraid that the mistakes just look like we don't have our thing together. And this is why we often get plug and play initiatives. It's all done for you. Just do this. And the people come to the workshop and now everybody's going to do the thing. That's not how learning happens, right? And you have to start with small tiny experiments. It could be 3 or 4 classrooms of teachers who are motivated to look at their practice, have some tools and skills as reflective practitioners, and then for them to actually look at the intelligent failures, right? Look at their first pancakes. I keep a private community for folks who are in my various programs. And I tell you, there are 2 right now that are just buzzing because teachers are actually posting videos and audio of them actually doing their first pancake. We're in a cycle right now, and that is our only goal. For this first 2 weeks, do your first pancake, and it just takes the pressure off. So a leader who is a learner understands they're teaching not only their educators to focus on good pedagogy, evidence-based practices, but also on the process of change. That's why chapter 4 in the book is all about change, how change happens, my 5 change hacks, right? Because if you don't get that, you can't lead people through the process of shifting, making these major shifts that are going to change outcomes for students and families.
Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We are back for segment 2 of an Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Zaretta Hammond, National Education Consultant and the author of Rebuilding Students' Learning Power. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision they made, and then we discuss it. So, Zaretta, what happened?
And this is a few months ago, actually, where I'd been meeting to set up some processes that was bringing inquiry into a school that I assumed had some infrastructure for this kind of work. They had raised their hand as a school. Yes, we're excited about the work. And we're in conversation, and you make assumptions about where people are. Turns out we got down the road. Teachers were supposed to be meeting in teams, even though they were all from the same school. They were supposed to break up into teams. I ended up going to do a one-on-one coaching session with a teacher, and I asked her, I said, "What did your team say about that?" And she said, "We're not operating in teams." And I was, "What?" That's a core element of the practice.
Right.
And I think the reflection for me was assumptions, right? You think information is not transformation just because people nod their head. What's the due diligence to actually assess the current reality in terms of readiness for some work? And so
this is fantastic. Can I interrupt for a moment just so that I can sort of... So this is fantastic because when you think about nearly 40% of school leaders around the country are in their first or second year, there's been such a churn and turnover around superintendents. And so many inherit teams or inherit systems that they believe they've been told that are doing certain things, right? Whether they're doing PLCs or they're doing standard reference grading or they're doing whatever they're doing. They make some assumptions as they enter and then unfortunately come to a stark realization that, nope, that is not the case. So your example is so perfect because I think it'll resonate with so many. So as you get to this school, obviously you're going to say to me like, it's fairly obvious, Peter, what got overlooked. But let me ask the question anyway. What was overlooked?
What was overlooked was this, what I call an assessment of current reality, because we are often different parties are looking at the same thing. What I came to understand is in our initial conversations, do you have PLCs? Yes, we have PLCs. Turns out that after this revelation about they're not actually meeting as teams, there was no kind of teamness, they call every meeting a PLC.
Oh, it's just, that's our PLC. It's our PLC. Wow.
And so again, the 4 is for questions, learning by doing, right? All the principles and practices that create the condition for a culture of learning, but also the process of teachers reflecting and shifting their practice, which is at the core of a PLC. I assume those things were there. So we had gotten a little down the road only to find out, oh my goodness, we had no real continuum.
Oh my word. And I think about what you said in segment 1 about your book is a collective process. It's not an individual pursuit.
Yeah. But what I realized too, Peter, and this is back to what the leader has to create and hold space for is, there was no one to blame per se, because the reality is people in their mind thought they had those things and they were still focused on strategy. So we realize across 3 domains, leaders have to be thinking about the work as they do this assessment of current reality. What are the mindsets, mental models operating, right? And those 2 are different things, right? Mental model is how do you think learning happens? How do you think this change happens? The mindset is then the kind of belief or energy or motion that you bring to it because it's based on this mental model. Then there's the practices themselves, and then there are the systems that support the kind of change, bookend by the mental models that will drive action, and then the systems that will support the shifts and the change and the continuous improvement. I learned my lesson to do my due diligence, to help people slow down. It's funny because this is how I coach teachers, right? I have one teacher, we did one of our, we call them knowledge lab cycles on a Friday. We had a wonderful full day. We rehearse, we get in it. It's very action oriented. So the teacher felt, oh, great. And this is a really good teacher. And then tried something with Monday morning, first thing Monday morning, and gets in our private community. And that pancake not only was a flop, but it stuck to the ceiling and was dripping.
It's quite an image.
It was quite an image. Understanding that, number one, she could be highly reflective. Then we all did the after action. Let's step back and see, right? You learned about that on Friday. What was your rollout plan? Because part of what I talk about in the book, too, is you need a rollout plan. So week 1 for the rollout plan is, how are you going to talk about that? Write a script. What time is this going to take place? Are you going to make some extra time? What are you not going to do, or what are you going to shift, right? How are you, there are all these small decisions. This is the kind of instructional decision-making that the teacher has to think about as she's introducing students to a new thing, right? That teacher didn't even give herself the space of a day to do that, right? And that was her reflection. So the beauty of errors as information is she had enough reflective practice where she can see, that thing.
Yeah. It's interesting because you're describing her learning and it seems to be traveling on a parallel path to your own learning about
That's
something,
right.
In terms
That's
of,
right.
and what a wonderful way for you to be able to have walked in the same shoes. Like, look,
Absolutely.
I could have been doing this for 25 years, and yet still I fell
That's
victim
right.
to the impulse to make a quick decision in terms of, or the impulse to make a decision without potentially first saying, tell me about the norms or the nested patterns associated with your PLCs.
That's right. The nested patterns, I really like that in your framework because this is true. And this is why it's a discipline. So even if we are a learning leader, right? A leader who is engaging in continuous improvement, building background knowledge around various things, we still have to have a protocol to check ourselves, right? This is Atul Gawande talks about this in the Checklist Manifesto, right? He's a heart surgeon, author. I don't know how the man does it all. But he talked about after 15 years as a heart surgeon, he decided to invest in a coach. What could the coach tell me? He was one of the top surgeons in the country. And he thought it'll be a quick conversation. The coach is watching him do a procedure. He comes, has a yellow pad. He comes out, they confer. And he realizes rather than a few scribbles, this man has 16 pages of handwritten notes. Right? Oh, what am I doing?
What did you
Right?
see? Right.
Absolutely. And I guess my point is this is why not only is it the leader, this is why we need a leadership team. This is why we need buddies who can see behind us. Tiger Woods has a coach. Why? Because someone can stand behind him and look at his swing. Serena Williams has a coach, right? And why do top players have to have a coach?
Yeah. Your
Because
first
they-
seat in every orchestra has
Absolutely.
a coach. They go, right? University of Michigan, the basketball coach whose team was in the Final Four, there was an article in The Athletic, and he uses a high school principal to help him give feedback on, he records his sessions with his players and then says, okay, now tell me what the value of the work that you do to develop leaders and educational leaders is so important that this coach says, I have so much to learn.
You mentioned something because I do really encourage them to use video and audio recordings. If you have a phone, right, record the conversation and then listen to it afterwards. And sometimes as rehearsal, as part of this rollout, rehearse how you would say that or roll that out before you get in front of people.
Yeah.
And then listen to it or share that. We use elements of Japanese lesson study with colleagues. Actually run the lesson, run through it to actually get feedback, to see where your own pitfalls and choke points are, right? So the protocol around not making assumptions, the ability to look for those nested patterns and practices as part of assessing current reality also has to be within the container of our own protocols to have that checklist to be the things we typically are blind to.
Yes. There's an organization called the Water Center for Systems Learning, and they were.
I love them.
And do you know them?
Oh, yeah. I've gone to their
fantastic.
webinars. And
They're fantastic,
good.
right? And one of their habits of systems thinking pieces is that a system structure generates its behavior. And as you're saying this, I'm like, the system structure is generating certain behaviors.
That's right.
That's amazing.
right.
Let me get back to one of the questions I did want to ask you. What did you learn about relationships? You get there, you notice that everything was called a PLC. You had to sort of make a mid-course correction. And there had to be something you learned about relationships, as well as what new relationships were then formed as you probably helped them to develop the structures that they needed to do this important work.
Yeah. And that's such a great question because one of the first two mind change hacks that I talk about, the first one is get your mind, like how are you understanding your own mental models and being able to disrupt yourself. That's the second one. Because now in relationship, I had to actually, rather than be upset with them, I had to actually say, how do I get underneath what they believe is actually happening? Because then the tension is we think we're saying the same thing. We think we're talking the same language or have shared understanding, and we really don't. So I need to actually be able in that relationship to anchor in a shared understanding, but twist to take them to a new and deeper understanding, to offer some gentle disequilibrium, to look at how they may not have been using that term consistently, right? Or in line with what before was saying, not to poo-poo what they're doing, because that to me is the tension of the relationship.
Of course,
right?
then that just introduces shame and judgment and all those kinds of
and
things.
nobody's inviting that into their school,
Right.
right? And so again, it shuts down the relationship. At the same time, you don't want to just try to be, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't want to just try to be so complimentary that everything is great here. Yeah. And prevent them from having the opportunity to take off the rose-colored glasses and to actually look at what needs to change, right? And this is what Richard Elmore talked about as the unexamined wallpaper. We go back and forth across wallpaper in a house or a room or office so often, the brain just stops recognizing the pattern and we just become blind to it. So part of the work that I try to do is to help leaders, help coaches, help teachers have a catalytic moment. How do I help you see what is actually there versus me trying to tell you? Because as long as that mental model is there and you haven't shifted that mental model, you're going to keep acting as if that is the right procedure, protocol that needs to happen. So that's, to me, the kind of relationship I have to build, right? How do I do that and still have them feel like they want to be part of it?
That's right. That's right. It's lunch, and why don't you take a long one? Right? Yeah. And I suggest the Pancake House because it seems like you've a lot to learn.
But what I will tell you is that has happened many times in the sense of having to help people see this reality. And people appreciate it, right? As long as you can understand the human side of change. There's a great book out there. It's an oldie but a goodie by Robert Evans. It's called The Human Side of School Change. I have not come across anything as succinct. There are a lot of good books on leadership, but this one really talks about that human side of change.
Okay. And you're familiar with An Ethic of Excellence?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Because I love that book for instruction. In terms of instruction, human-centered, and guiding children. And so I always use that as to leaders, read this, and then I want you to think about, extrapolate for yourself as a leader now, not just as a teacher.
And what I like about this book, The Human Side of School Change,
can't wait. I'm going to check it out.
It actually talks about what is the reaction someone is having. And when you can start to read that reaction, is it they're feeling a sense of loss? Because, it's a practice, we like doing that. Like, how do you now support? What's the support you're prepared to give somebody who's experienced a sense of loss? Or are they taking that feedback or kind of this new information as an affront to their practice and their professionalism?
I love this. Yeah.
How will you do this? So he has 5 different things. And to me, that's what a leader's prepared for. And that imperfect leader knows that is all that tension in creating that disequilibrium is for a moment going to feel like a fracture in the relationship, but that building of that before we get there, and that's one of the agreements. We have to have radical candor, not in the sense you need to tell you about yourself, but as in we need to look at the grammar of schooling in a way that how does it relate to what our aspiration is? If our aspiration is every student is a powerful learner or every student has a certain type of deep learning experience with joy and fun, how are we actually doing that if a lot of what we're doing is around compliance?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. I was just thinking of that word, compliance. I was thinking also about this. It's so powerful to want to just maintain the status quo because this idea of every time we try to move for change or to agitate for change, we know how often the system will aggressively try to return to status quo. So sometimes we just say, why even bother? Those who have always benefited from the system are going to work aggressively to get back to that. And so what you're talking about, I think, is how do I set the stage for we're going to feel some disequilibrium. I love how you said, but I'm going to do it in terms of gentle
That's right.
gentle disequilibrium. And how to do that work together to say it's going to be uncomfortable. And yet I still, whether you through your actions and your words, but I still love you. We're going to do this work.
That's right. We have containers that allow us to move through whatever emotional response that we're having. and that the imperfect leader understands there's going to be turbulence. And today you're not going to like me. Just like a teacher knows that if you push the student to their outer edge of their zone of proximal development, they are not liking you in the moment. It's like a personal trainer. Oh, we're about to up the speed on the
Right. We're going to do 100 reps, but I did 20. What?
Nobody's liking you in the moment, but you stand on a foundation of relationship where you know this person is working for your good. This person has your best interest at heart. That hasn't changed, and that is reinforced over time. Here's the other thing I'll say, Peter, that I think circumvents in some ways the system's desire to return to this status quo, and that is tiny experiments. So when you can take tiny little seeds and plant them and grow them versus an all out, everybody's going to start, like the system just will resist. Everybody's going to change at once. But when we understand change can actually have a compound effect, right? Small change here actually starts to grow into instructional norms, into this is the way teachers talk about their practice. This is the way they track students to actually see if they are teaching for learning, not just teaching to cover their content like that. And that is a slower kind of pace. So one of my mantras to folks that I'm working with is we go slow to go fast, right? Because urgency actually is not a friend of the kind of change and shift we want to see. We think it is. We got to change it now. Get the scores up.
When superintendents are told, they bring you in and they say, we need transformation now. And so many that I see that a big reason why they last less than 3 years is because they're going, follow me. And people are like, we're right behind you. And then they go, how far behind me are you? Because I don't see you. They are marching. And then their board gets disillusioned because they're getting feedback that this isn't the kind of change in the pace and all that kind of stuff. So,
that's right.
Yeah. Let me just ask this last question of this after action review, which is in the end, so going back to your scenario of working with this school and its PLC model, what was something that was good that came out of this situation?
A shift in mental model. We couldn't even start to think about bringing these other practices in until they had a better understanding that, differentiating a meeting, which might be a staff meeting or grade level team meeting, with a PLC meeting, that these were different things.
Yeah.
And as a result, we were able to say and go back and reconnect ourselves to DeFore's learning by doing. So now, as we took an inquiry stance, so they have tools and processes. There are probably half a dozen instructional practices that we try to integrate over the course of the year. Now they were better equipped in understanding why this whole inquiry piece was there versus I'm just going to try it and report back, right? And that's what a lot of people think they're doing, right? Oh, I'm going to do action research. But this is inquiry in when you're actually trying to change things, and the student being the locus of the change looks a little different. So that mental model shift where we collectively said, and to give them a moment to do that. And we just took over one of our meetings to actually deconstruct that and then reconstruct it with what's the small thing that you're going to
And so then when you're starting new relationships with new school districts, has that experience also shifted the way that you enter the conversation with them?
Yeah, part of what we do is invest a lot of time up front, maybe 4 to 6 weeks in partner conversations. So yeah, we do some version of instructional rounds, but now I want to always make sure, and this is what I've been doing recently, is make sure that we are using language and terms correctly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Shared language, being able to assess current reality and assess the emotional temperature for change. Because people they say they want change, they raise their hand for it, they bring you in for it. But when the change starts, the turbulence of change starts, everybody starts to say, that's too much. I don't have time for that.
Right.
Now change is always taking a little extra, right? We always take a dip before we go up and as our competence grows, right? All these things have always been true about change inside the classroom and in our own lives as humans. But there's a way in which this urgency and the way change, getting scores up, is supposed to happen that somehow we get amnesia. about.
It's so true. And I'll go back to your metaphor of the pancakes. They're like, I found the best recipe. Oh, I also found a good recipe. Okay, now are we making Oh, they smell good. And then they come in, how many pancakes we make? I don't know. This is getting a little overwhelming. So,
Or
yeah.
it's getting hot in this kitchen.
It's getting hot in this kitchen.
Oh, wow. Does it have to be so hot?
Exactly. I think we're running out of ingredients. Like we did all the
pan.
That's so funny. Our guest today was Zaretta Hammond, National Education Consultant and author of Rebuilding Students' Learning Power, Teaching for Instructional Equity and Cognitive Justice. I'm starting very soon a job in Cartagena, Colombia as a principal of an elementary school. I'm excited to get back to the day-to-day, and I am thrilled to know you, to have read your book, and to have had this conversation, because I feel even better positioned to have some of these conversations with the teachers that I'll be working with. I probably won't use the metaphor of pancakes. I'll probably use buñuelos because that's more appropriate, but it's going to be great. They're going to be great. And so really, I'm grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a wonderful conversation.
Okay, we're back, Peter.
Okay, I'm showing you something on my screen. So for those who listen to the podcast, that's very nice. We also had such an incredible spike in people watching. So if you want to go to Apple Podcasts, you can actually watch our conversation. So here's a coin. I just found this, and my mother gave it to me in 1992, and it's got a sun on one side and a moon on the other. And I always sort of interpreted it as heads and tails. The sun was good and the moon was bad, and I don't know why I came to that conclusion. As I was looking, I was like, maybe it's more like what fires me up and what cools me down, or who am I in this moment, and should I live that or think about what, if I'm fired up, what do I need to cool down? Anyway, I'm really enjoying it. And you may be saying, what the heck?
What the hell?
I know. But I was thinking about this conversation with Zaretta. There's a lot to be like fired up about, and there's a lot to sort of be cool about. So I think about our conversation that I had with Zaretta Hammond, and I'm thinking I got fired up for the right reasons, in that, like, so many schools, we spend so much time talking about belonging, and belonging is super important. There's nothing more important than building relationships with the people you work with, the children, their families, community at large. And it isn't just about belonging. If we're schools and we're about learning, then I take her quote about cognitive justice. We can increase belonging. We can have social, psychological safety in schools, but to what end? Right. If students' cognition has been underdeveloped. And so that got me fired up, that it isn't just about belonging, which is a precursor for everything, I do believe. However, you can't stay there. And I remember a principal who once said to me, when she had people applying for jobs, she goes, I just want to love kids. And she's like, I'd never hired that person, because I want you to love kids, but I want you to teach them. And teaching isn't about just you teaching. It's about understanding your role in facilitating their learning. So that's my long way of saying, thanks, Mom, for this coin. I found it. And it was a good reminder of this conversation and its lessons.
You named the thing that I think Zaretta and I resonate together on that. I've done quote unquote equity work for so long, trying to do a better job of meeting the needs of marginalized student populations and families in public systems, in public schools. And what I mean by that is teach them to read. I don't need you to be their friend. They got plenty of friends. They don't need you. What they need is they need the actual skills that we say school is about, that to be held accountable for their learning, right? And that they learn it themselves. This is the metacognition and the basically moving from dependent to independent learner that she so eloquently says that this is exactly what we're supposed to be doing. And I don't think, I'll even just speak for myself as a teacher. I had a bunch of different kids who struggled, and I put scaffolds in to support them, and I probably never pulled the scaffolds out. I left them in place out of nervousness or anxiety about them failing. And that's the whole point, is that they should fail multiple times. And school's just not set up that way. It's not the school structure, the public school structure is not really set up to fail. It's set up to do assignments. And you get one chance to do it. In fact, there's still schools where if you don't turn it in, you get a 0. And I'm like, what did they learn from that?
That one drives me nuts. What also drives me nuts is you can redo it, but you can't get more than a B. Why? I don't understand. Why is it that I can't get higher than a B if I learned from my mistakes? I took the time to redo it, and now I got an A? No, you got a B because that was the second time. Wait, so I'm sorry. even in the Olympics, you get 3 chances to jump the high jump, right? Sorry, you knocked it over that first time. The next 2, you might do better, but we're going to use your first jump. No, we don't do that.
It's just so persistently absurd. Even the example she gave, like Tiger Woods has a coach, Serena has a coach. Like,
Yes.
they're all trying to get better.
Yeah.
And we aren't doing that as educators often enough. And we aren't doing that for students enough to say, hey, failure is information.
Yes.
You learn from the failure. You try again.
So I want to say this because we went into the conversation when you and I had our initial conversation. Oh, and get ready, and it's spicy pancake. So let me just didn't you love this metaphor of the first pancake, right? This sort of a safe space for intelligent failure where errors are viewed as an essential information rather than a sign of incompetence. And I loved because she says errors, it's not the outcome we wanted. Okay, but if we want to take a moment and learn from it, just like when we make pancakes, that first pancake is always a little jacked up. No one shuts the kitchen, right? But no one shuts the kitchen down. Instead, what they do is that they use that information to adjust. And I was like, yes.
100%. And because even in failure, the learning is still happening, it makes me think of, who eats the first pancake? I do. I don't mind. It tastes
and I
great.
eat the second one too. I'm like, let me just make sure this one's as good as I think it's going to be. It is.
Exactly. I love the metaphor that it takes practice. You're going to mess up. And when you mess up, you make adjustments. And this is what the entire purpose of the podcast for leaders is that. The imperfect leader is someone who says, I made a mistake. I just did. Interestingly enough, Peter, we took the whole concept of the after action review and ran it with a whole leadership team. We used our podcast model. I said, hey,
I love it.
Here's questions. And use that as a model because this meeting that y'all ran went wonky. It went wonky. That's okay. Let's learn to make it.
Do we say 3 teaspoons of sugar? We put 3 tablespoons of salt. Whoops. Yeah, that pancake, actually, let's start with a new batter. Let's figure this out.
Exactly. Which I also loved that metaphor for her when she talked about that belonging is important. This is the cognitive justice part. But she compared it to being a chef. It's not just about the tools. You don't go to chef school to learn the tools. You learn the concepts of what it means to be a chef. You learn what I would argue is science. You learn chemistry. You learn how ingredients interact with each other, what changes them, how they change, all of those things. That's what you learn besides physical technique, skill.
I like that. I'm thinking about schools. I'm like, and the seasons are different. And so you have different things that are in season. Particularly, you also don't want to eat gazpacho in the middle of winter, or you don't want
all of it. That's
right?
100% true. I think that this is something that a lot of folks don't realize. It's like, the reason why your strawberries taste terrible in January is because there's no strawberries. If you wait in the summer, this is why they're better. And this is us as teachers and educators, as leaders, knowing that learning it takes time. Teaching is skill-based. It is understanding she even talks about it from the place of it's not about as much about the teacher as it is about the kid. So learning the seasons or learning what's in season, you learn the kid. And in learning the kid, you can apply different skills at different times in order to accelerate going from dependent to independent learner. I thought that's what I'm trying to build. I'm trying to support leaders to do. It sounds easy when she talks about it, but obviously it's really hard.
Yeah. And what I appreciate is that I think at one point I say to her about coming in as a consultant and she's, we don't do one and done kind of thing like this. You have to really be interested in doing long-term work. And I think you feel similarly, which was probably why you are associated with her or friends with her, why you work so well together is this idea that this is hard work and it isn't done in one day. And in fact, it is a multi-year process.
Exactly. This is, she just like I don't, I don't sell anything prepackaged. Yes, the most prepackaged now is a book. I wrote a book. So there's a book now, but I think there are chapters in the book that literally, there it is. Yeah. Literally kind of there. Part imperfect leader background. That literally say this book's
I've been
not
reading
enough.
it again. It's so good because as I think about my new role, I'm like, I got to read this too.
I just found out that in Philadelphia public schools, and Brenda Elliott, Dr. Elliott bought it for principals in Philadelphia public school because the idea behind it is meant to be iterative. It's meant to be a cycle of learning, not to be a thing that you do. It's not just one thing. And I hope I say it enough in the book to say, what I wrote here, not enough. It's not good enough. There's so much more. In fact, you know what you should do? you should read Zaretta's book. That's what you should do.
Absolutely.
That leads to the last thing that I want to say that Zaretta said. I want to read the quote that she said, and that was that the imperfect leader knows that the tension in creating that disequilibrium is for a moment going to feel like a fracture in the relationship, but building relationship before we get there so that we can have radical candor. That phrase, radical candor, I love.
It's a great.
I loved it. And you and I have talked about this 1,000 times about how the Hattie quote, you need to have enough relationship in order to burn it, because that's how failure works. When I say that didn't work, try it again, it breaks a little bit of the relationship. It burns a little relationship or trust. But if I have enough, we're going to do it again together, over and over. That's how this works.
What a great place to finish.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was really great. You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And Jamie, another conversation in the books.
Another one.
As one of my favorite broadcasters says after a Met game, it's in the books. Although right now, what's in the books?
Another disappointing,
loss. In the books.
Chapter.
Yeah, when they win, he says, "Put it in the books." Howie Rose. I wonder when we lose. There's another footnote of a terrible season. You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader. I will see you next week, Jamie.
I'll see you next week.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print-inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzan.
Please join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.